very excited to talk about the African Business Aircraft Association to you today, AfBAA. I wanted to start out with this slide. I saw the slide actually on Facebook and it got my attention. Clearly a lot of people see and get introduced to Africa in elementary and grammar school. And it's usually Africa is in the center of the map, it's quite flat, and it appears pretty much normal. But when you think about Africa and you realize how vast it is, I thought this slide says it all. If you could look at this slide, you could fit the United States, most of Europe, China, India, Eastern Europe, France and Spain to the left of North Africa are just dwarfed with the sheer magnitude of the continent. That tells you how big it is and what a challenge we have in traveling around in Africa. And I thought nothing better than introducing my presentation with this slide. It makes the point. Africa itself is a huge continent. It has 56 countries right now. There were 55 in the beginning of this year. Now there were 56 with South Africa coming to life as the newest member. The population went up to 1 billion, a lot of people. It's very economically diverse. You have mineral resources, industries, agriculture, and now in the West, of course, we have developing oil industries and hydrocarbons. Africa is making great strides in doing the right thing in terms of political stability, in terms of routing out the kind of classical corruption that we have come to associate with the continent. That's pretty much it's getting behind us. And the United Nations has done great work in stamping out diseases and malaria and all the kind of things that we associate Africa with. It's a new place. As a result of that, because of its size, because of its development, because of the resources that Africa has at its disposal, aviation, and especially business aviation, is becoming truly a necessity. The economic diversity that we have requires that we can travel throughout Africa and make use of business aircraft. Right now, it would be essential for growth of medical facilities, tourism, all these activities that can well benefit from business aviation is something that we're looking at right now. The poor transportation that we have in Africa right now, if you ever travel through Africa, whether it be in the north, in Egypt and North Africa, or in the south, or in the heartland of Africa, it demands that we have business aviation, demands that entrepreneurs and government officials and different types of NGOs can move around the continent in a manner that gives them the ability to do their job well. If you look at the Africa business aviation installed fleet, you're looking at roughly 1,300 aircraft, if you count them from piston to light jets to medium jets. Of these 1,300, we're looking roughly at about 400 to 500 jets that are within 5 years of age. This chart represents all the registered aircraft in the region. As you look across the continent, and as I have been flying there quite often, there's certainly a vacuum and a need for an association that would cover the entire African continent. Previously and historically, we've had the Middle East Business Aircraft Association that's been in place for several years, and it deals with the Arab, Muslim, North African region, as well as the Business Aircraft Association of South Africa that covers primarily the southern part of Africa. But there was never an association put in place to address the needs of all 56 nations. And that's where the African Business Aircraft Association idea came into being. When we discussed the possibility of having this association, I went around Africa and discussed it with entrepreneurs, operators, aircraft owners, some heads of state, civil aviation authority ministers, and transportation ministers. And certainly what we have developed as a result of these contacts and as a result of talking to our boards that I'll discuss in a minute, we developed a mission and a vision that sees the recognition of aviation as an asset to Africa, whether it be to the government, to the businesses, members, or business leaders throughout Africa. Our vision is to make sure that business aviation is recognized as an asset. Our mission is to promote the understanding and the benefit of business aviation. That's probably easier said than done. Business aviation tradition is viewed as a luxury. In fact, as we all know, especially in this environment, it can be a luxury, it's certainly a great luxury, but it's certainly a necessity and a tool. One of the things that, having spent 18 years in the business, I've learned is that wealthy people can buy just about everything. The one thing they cannot buy is time, and that's what business aviation buys, is time. And that's what we will be bringing to leaders in Africa to understand that the value of this business. To do that, we've put together a list of guiding principles, the top of which, of course, is advocacy. We have to be able to bring to the governments and the businesses the benefits of what we can do. Safety is something that's very, very important. And Africa has not enjoyed a great track record of safety, and that's something that we must address and we must pursue. We pursue that through recurring training, we pursue that through safety. The integrity of what the papers say is what the papers really mean, and service. Service is very important. And finally, and first and foremost, as I said before, training. Training, training, training. Probably one of the most important guiding principles that we're going to bring to the continent. We have begun our long road about maybe 2 years ago when I was flying across Africa and I started talking to people. Since then, we have put together a very robust family members. We have secured about 3 years worth of funding. That's very important. Funding is extraordinarily important for us to make sure that we go forward. We've elected a board. I'm very honored to be the first chairman of the association, along with my colleague Ivor from South Africa. We're very, very fortunate to have someone of his stature and caliber with us. We have also made sure that we retain immediately a professional staff, and that's why Rabi Fahmy has joined us. He's been instrumental in making sure that we move forward. And in addition to that, we have sought the guidance of no one other than John Alcott, who you all know has had tremendous roles in whether it be NBAA or NBAA or EBASE. We have, one of the first things we need to do in the association was to put the governance in place. That's very, very important. As a result, we have had our meeting in South Africa. We were hosted by my colleague and friend Ivor. We had a good meeting where we elected and we have put together the structure of the organization. We have an executive committee right now, a budget and compensation committee headed by Ivor, a nominating membership committee headed by a very enthusiastic African from the north. His name is Omar Zolani, and the international relations committee headed by the very capable Hind al-Shashashbi. This is a very, very robust and very august group of people that have the energy and have the dedication and the passion for aviation. This is the first time that we will publish the list of individuals and groups that have come together to form the organization. You can see it there. We have worked very hard to make sure that the group makes a lot of sense. So we have operators, we have FBOs, we have in place charter and management operation, flight support services centers. Certainly we have avionic companies, and we thought that it would be very important to have an honorary member that represents the aviation business in the EU and Europe, and that's why we have picked Mr. Piero Scrapolini. So we're very glad, and I think we're very fortunate to have the commitment of this group of people, and you will be seeing them, and you'll be seeing their endeavors and efforts over the years to come, the next years to come. Also, we have put together, of course, the structure of the new membership categories. The launch members, the operators members, suppliers members, and affiliate memberships. This is what we'll go in right now, and that's how we'll be attracting new members right now with the different fee structure that's in place. AfBAA has come a long way in a very, very short period of time. And that's primarily due to its staff and its dedicated founding members. We have set our goals pretty much very realistically. We have put together our application to AfBAA that will go in place during NBAA. We expect that application to be successfully reviewed and actioned, and we will be member of AfBAA, if everything goes well, no later than EBASE next year. One of our first actions is we're going to put together a white paper. That white paper will discuss the state of affairs in business aviation in Africa. Subsequent to that, we will be commissioning a very intense, very comprehensive paper that talks about the demographic and spells in great detail the challenges, the different categories that exist in Africa, and does a very, very good survey in terms of the demographic of the installed base. So for the first time, we'll have a governing document, a guiding document, if you will, that everybody can refer to, and we will know where business aviation is going. Hopefully, with these documents in place, and with the research that's in place, we'll be able to represent and present to the Organization of African Unity for the 5th Committee some of the suggestions to resolve some of the most pressing needs that we have in business aviation. These papers will highlight them, and hopefully we'll be able to bring them to the Organization of African Unity, as well, I believe, to the Arab League, because they have, of course, the responsibility for the North African states. I think that brings us to a conclusion of what we're doing in AfBAA. I'm very excited to be here. I think there is a lot of excitement, and we would be very glad to take any questions from the audience, and Ivar and I will be at your service. Thank you very much. Please.
I was just wondering if you have available PDF or something of the presentation?
Yes, absolutely. Please.
Which regions in Africa are particularly important to you, and which ones can you see emerging over the next 5 to 10 years?
Would you repeat the question, please?
The question was, which regions in Africa do we see to be the most important, and which ones are emerging over the next 5 to 10 years? You know, the very first slide that you looked at showed the complete continent as if it was fully populated. The reality is that the bulk of the population is in the north and the south. But what's starting to happen is that business aviation is becoming most prevalent in the center, which is, you know, the most difficult thing to do in Africa right now is to travel east-west. Some of the most expensive commercial airline routes are between East and West Africa, and in fact, a lot of the growth and development on the continent has been seriously hampered by the lack of ability to travel east-west. So we see huge growth in the south. Certainly South Africa is becoming a major player. Nigeria is becoming a very major player. In fact, you will find a big density of new aircraft in Nigeria. North Africa has always been a serious hub. But I personally see a lot of growth in the Central African regions, not in terms of volume, but in terms of new entrants into the market.
And what's driving that demand that comes from?
So growth in Africa today is driven by a number of things. First of all, you know, everybody talks of Africa as the next as the next tiger, and it really is. First of all, we have huge consumer growth in Africa. We have a level of consumer growth that we've never seen before. That's bringing with it a lot of international corporations which have to travel into the continent. The number of M-registered aircraft that we're seeing all over Africa for the first time ever is incredibly encouraging. It means that suddenly America has discovered Africa. But over and above that, there's a lot of investment from South Africa into the continent at the moment, and you can't get from South Africa regularly into these places. So the growth is being driven by consumer demand, huge growth in the mining and minerals sector, huge growth in the oil and gas sector. Now, these are all people who are traditional users of business aircraft. Huge growth in the retail sector, and more growth now in the property sector. So all of these elements are driving the use of business aircraft, but more importantly than driving just the use of business aircraft, the airlines can't keep up with the demand. So without business aircraft, you can't actually do business in many of these places.
Any other questions?
Yes, what about infrastructures in Africa for business aviation?
Traditional infrastructure, as Ivor pointed out, it relates directly to the population and the installed base. Certainly South Africa right now probably has the best infrastructure for business aircraft. The business aircraft infrastructure in the north was beginning to be not at par yet with South Africa, but certainly was up and coming. In Nigeria right now, and in the West, we're finding leaders in the industry such as Evergreen Apple, for example, putting together the kind of quality FBOs, the kind of quality infrastructure, the kind of quality service that you would expect to find in Dulles or in Las Vegas or what have you. So while the infrastructure may be spotty, where it's there, it's very high quality. And we hope to be able to make sure that we put a standard in place so that those who are coming into the business make sure that they reach the standard that has been set already by people on the ground, such as Evergreen Apple, Universal, and all the other operators that are in place right now.
Perhaps, Tarek, I can add to that the infrastructure, you can count on maybe one hand the number of really professional operators. There are organizations such as ExecuJet, who are global organizations, do an incredible job. But the demand has not been there for the coverage to be what it needs to be. And this is one of the biggest challenges, or one of the biggest goals of the association, is going to be to drive that demand, which is then going to allow for the expansion that will create a viable infrastructure base.
I'd like to point out, what's very interesting in Africa is that if you would look back and say, geez, if I knew what the stock market was going to do, and I know what I know now, 10, 20 years ago, I'd be a very rich man. Well, in Africa, you know where things are going. You know what needs to be built. You know that FBOs need to be in place. You know that a registrar must be established. You know that MROs have to be in place with the right standard. You know all these things. There is nothing not to know. We just need to put it in place. It's been done before. It's been done in North America. It's been done in Europe. It needs to be done properly in Africa. The one thing I'd like to point out, everybody in the organization, with very few exceptions, are African-born in the association. And I'd also like to point out that we have one of our esteemed members of the organization, a founding member, Mr. Shigun, from Evergreen Apple in Nigeria. And he's been a leader in providing the kind of services that hopefully we will standardize throughout the region.
And here's a perfect example. He will tell you that there was very little business aviation infrastructure in Nigeria until he created it. Now, it's one of those, it's very difficult to sit in the United States and imagine how little infrastructure we really have. And unless you have people of vision that create the infrastructure, the demand will not be there. This is not going to only be a demand-driven process. You have to create the infrastructure, which then encourages the demand. And we hope to see a lot more of this kind of leadership around the continent.
Yes.
And Diana, I just wanted to ask you about the OEM support that you've got. You've got a number of OEMs as founding members. What about the others that certainly body in?
OEMs are part of the founding members. We're very interested in having them with us. That's very important. We have Embraer. We're fortunate enough to have Gulfstream. We're fortunate enough to have Hawker. I believe that's it. But more importantly, we have operators. Operators do the legwork, the heavy lifting on the ground. We have plenty of operators in place, as well as flight support services companies.
I think one of the interesting things about the OEMs is Africa has been traditionally viewed as a dumping ground for old aircraft. That's coming to a stop very quickly. There are a number of African governments who are putting restrictions on the import of very old aircraft. And in fact, somewhat like China, most governments are encouraging the acquisition of new aircraft. And the OEMs need to take Africa very seriously because a lot of the markets around the world have reached saturation point. Where's the next growth is going to come from Asia and from Africa. So I'm certainly encouraged by the interest that the OEMs are showing, but they're going to have to do some hard work. There's lots of competition out there.
Please.
Just a comment, you're going to make the Russians and Ukrainians very unhappy.
Oh yeah, that's true.
I don't know, maybe we'll see a viable Russian business jet soon. But you know what, we have to make the Russians and the Ukrainians very unhappy for a very simple reason. A lot of the safety track record in Africa is really shocking. And part of the reason it's shocking is because there is a culture of cutting corners. And a lot of the, if you take the Russian and the Ukrainian aircraft out of the equation, our safety record is actually extremely good. We really have to do everything as an association to try and kill